I'd like to start by voicing my opposition to the government's use of the guillotine on this. This is the second time this has happened in 2 days. We had it yesterday in the social welfare bill. This is intentionally stifling much-needed parliamentary debate on two critical pieces of legislation. Now, the government talked a good talk before the election about reform, about a new type of politics, about a meaningful role for Dáil Éireann. But it turns out that it was just that, it was talk. There has been no democratic revolution. There is no maturing of political debate, and there is no meaningful role here today for Dáil Éireann. So on the property tax, Minister, I'm not going to try and convince you of anything, because the arrogance of this cabinet has rendered it incapable of listening to other people's ideas. Instead, I'll use the few minutes I have to try and give voice to some people who cannot pay and some people who should not pay this tax. Let's start with those who cannot pay. 1 in 5 mortgages is now either in arrears or is being restructured. 1 in 10 Irish children is now in food poverty. 2 out of every 3 Irish adults now is less than €100 a month when bills are paid. And that was before their PRSI was raised and before their child benefit was cut. Do you think, Minister, they're going to have a few €100 spare at the end of next year to give you? And let's talk about those who should not pay. Let's talk about those who pay tens of thousands of euros in stamp duty. Let's talk about those in negative equity. What exactly are we taxing them on? Their debts. This government promised before the election to help people caught in that trap. But that's not what you've done. You've increased their child benefit, you've increased their income tax, and you've caved into the banks on finding meaningful solutions to the mortgages. And now, to top it off, you're actually going to tax them on the debt that has financially destroyed them. But somehow you're going to exempt first-time buyers from the tax. Extraordinary. And what is this tax anyway? It's not a wealth tax. If it was a wealth tax, you wouldn't tax people in negative equity. And it's not to raise money for local services. If it was, you would tax the occupier of the house who uses the local services, and you would fully adjust for regional variation in prices. It's not progressive. If it was, there wouldn't be this meaningless single jump at €1 million. It's not fair. If it was fair, stamp duty would be considered, and people in Wicklow and in Dublin and in other areas wouldn't have to pay multiples of what other people are going to pay. And most of all, it's not necessary. The figure being used is €500 million, but it's not €500 million. Taking out €500 million is going to reduce economic activity. Using the government's own multiplier, the government will raise €350 from this. Let's put that €350 into context. The Exchequer figures for next year include, in pay rises over the last 4 years for public servants, €700 million. So let's just be clear. The property tax will raise half of the amount needed for pay rises to public sector workers. So much for paying for vital public services, Minister. Now, I have tabled amendments to this legislation which address all of these issues, but I know that not a single one of them is going to be taken. So I would say to my colleagues in the government backbenches, if you believe what you're saying, and if you believe that you have a role in government that can influence legislation, say to the Minister that you will not vote this through next week in its current form. I'll leave you with this. Winston Churchill said, "A nation trying to tax itself into prosperity is like a man standing in a bucket and trying to lift himself up with the handle." Good luck with that.
Thank you, Deputy.